God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life.
Your key to financial opportunity.
Chapter 8, 138 Minutes. Sir, would you please state your name and occupation for the jury? Daryl G. Crafton. I'm an East Borough police officer, which is located in Wichita, Kansas. Officer Crafton, I'd like to direct your attention back to February the 12th of 1985 in Wichita. That's your area, is it not? Yes, sir. Were you working on the evening of February the 12th? Yes, sir, I was. Sir, I'd like to direct your attention to a Colonel Sanders there in Wichita. Did you have the occasion to see a lady that night that you subsequently identified in news releases or press releases that were broadcast at a later time? Yes, sir, I did. Alright, I'd like to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 4, which is an automobile. Would you like to take a look at that, sir, and see whether or not you can identify the tag number as being that of the car that night? Sir, the tag number I can't. Okay, I can identify that it was a Michigan tag, and this car does look a lot like the car I saw. Alright, sir, and where did you see the car at? It was at a Kentucky Fried Chicken, as my partner and I were, I say partner, the Wichita officer I was eating dinner with. Alright, what's the address on that in Wichita? 8210 East Kellogg? Did you see that car drive in the parking lot? Yes, sir. And what's your other officer's name that was with you? Officer Jim Merrick. Okay, and did he also observe that? Yes, he did. Was there anything that drew your attention to the car? Yes, sir, there was. The car had apparently missed the driveway or something like that, had gone over the curb, which drew our attention to the car itself. Okay, could you tell how many people were in the car? I thought 2 or maybe 3. Alright, did anyone get out of that car? While I was talking to my other officer, I didn't see anyone get out of the car. Although the person that had gotten out, which I later found out, was up at the counter ordering as we were getting ready to leave. Alright, did you ever talk to that person that night? Yes, I did. Was it a male or female? It was a female. Is that the person in the courtroom here today? Yes, she is. Would you please identify her for the jury? It's Lisa Dunn sitting at the defense table. Did you talk to her at all that night? Yes, I did. What was the conversation? Well, she apparently was getting ready to leave, and I just made a comment to her. I wanted to talk to her before she left, but we were also getting ready to leave. So when I talked to her, I asked her, more or less, I stated, looks like you ran over that curb over there, or missed the driveway. And she hesitated, but she said yes. And then I asked her, well, I thought maybe you were all drunk or something. And she said, no, just hungry. Okay. And then she proceeded toward the door, and I said, well, you be careful out there. And at that time, she went ahead and left. My partner and I were beginning to leave, and that was when she dropped the box or two that she was carrying in the parking lot. Alright, will you describe just briefly, please, for the jury, what the chicken place was like? I mean, the surroundings? Yes, sir. The doors as you come in from, the only doors that are open are facing east, and those doors are all glass. There are windows all around the building. However, there's about halfway up the wall, a brick wall all the way around. My partner and I were sitting at the southeast corner of the building, eating at the last booth in that corner, when this car drove in the driveway and had gone over the curb, parked down further south of us yet, and we were right at the corner of the building. Okay. We noticed that the occupants had sat in the car for a while, and that was when I was talking to my partner, and I may have not noticed who got out or when. Alright, sir. But when we got ready to leave, we noticed that Lisa was up at the counter and had already finished ordering, and we were getting ready to leave. Were you and your fellow officer in full uniform? Yes, sir, we were. Plainly distinguishing you as a law enforcement officer? Yes, sir. Were you carrying sidearms? Yes, sir. Alright, sir, did Lisa Dunn at any time say anything to you about she was in fear for her life or she needed help? No, sir. Was she in a position, you and your fellow officer, in a position there, was there any fear of someone in the automobile shooting through the window or striking her as you were talking to her? Well, sir, we had no idea who they were, or we might have been thinking something like that, but we had no reason to believe anyone in the car was dangerous. In fact, I had my back to the car and I had myself between Lisa and the car outside when I was talking to her. If she had made any request of you at that time, officer, what kind of action would you have taken if she had told you, I'm in fear for my life, those guys out there have guns, please help me? What would you have done? We would have taken some steps to protect her. We would have probably had to ask her some more questions. You can't just buy everything somebody says like that. Did you have radios with you or access to radios? Yes, sir. We both had portable radios, which you could have called for support if you needed to. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I have no further questions. James Charlie Hunter had been down in Texas visiting a brother, Paul, who called James Charlie when he decided it was time to head home to Overland Park, Kansas. A roofer, Charlie had submitted a workman's compensation claim and wanted to check on the status. He was a happy-go-lucky sort of guy. He's never been in serious trouble in his youth, in Johnson County or since. His life had been filled with minor scrimmages with the law, mainly incidents resulting from his drinking. He had 7 DUI arrests in Johnson County and had spent time in the Veterans Hospital for a habit that once had him downing 3 12-packs of beer in a single day. On the morning of February 12, 1985, the bearded, mustached, long-haired 32-year-old man was standing by the roadside near El Dorado, Kansas, hoping for a ride heading towards Kansas City. He had made it that far and was now only 4 hours or so from his folks' house in Overland Park, but he couldn't hitch a ride heading north. In fact, during the whole day, only 3 cars stopped, and they were not going in Charlie's direction. To make it worse, it was cold, only 13 degrees. Charlie shivered, even wearing a purple sweatshirt, brown hiking boots, plus insulated underwear under his blue jeans, and a white t-shirt with faded green sleeve. The front of the shirt had a decal saying, "There's no problem so big and complicated that you can't run away from." When a third car eventually stopped to offer a ride, it was going towards Wichita. Even though it wasn't quite the right direction, Charlie figured it might be his last chance to go anywhere that night. The driver let him off near a Quick Trip outside Wichita at 1 a.m. Inside the store, a woman in her 40s was carrying an armload of Bibles and gave him one. "I go to church sometimes," Charlie told her, "but I haven't had my soul saved if that's what you mean." She offered to take him into town in her car on North Broadway. They stopped at a Hills motel, where the woman went inside, talked to the room clerk, and came back out with a key. It almost seemed like routine, and it was obvious to Charlie she had done this before with hitchhikers and men like him. "Here," she said, giving him the key. "The bill is paid for the night." The woman drove away, and Charlie went to his room. He woke just after 10:30 a.m. and decided he better get going. He wanted to be home with his folks by dinner time. Charlie walked down the street in the direction someone said was I-35. That would take him to I-70, the way he had figured it. As he walked, he had his thumb out. But no one stopped until about noon, when a blue 1971 car with a red primer on the back pulled over to the curb. "Get in," said the young man behind the wheel. Inside, Charlie found Mark Walter, Daniel Remetta, and Lisa Dunn. He got in the back with his 2 bags and made room amongst some boxes, the trio's old luggage, and with a heap of trash there was barely room to squeeze in next to Lisa in the bucket seats. As they drove on, Danny did most of the talking and bragging. He seems like a good old boy, Charlie thought of Danny, believing him and Mark to just be a couple of giddy teenagers who had gotten themselves a girlfriend. On the road, Charlie had met a lot of people. They seemed innocent enough, Charlie thought. As Charlie sat squeezed against the 18-year-old girl, Danny looked back with a gleam of jealousy in his eye, but nonetheless asked Charlie if he wanted a beer. And with Charlie's habit, that was like asking a parched lawn if it wanted some rain. In fact, before they got to Salina, Charlie had downed 6 beers, Danny 4, and a little later Charlie's total had reached 10 Old Milwaukees. He could feel the glow, but not as much as vodka would have given him. That's where he got his biggest kicks after all. They were nearing the entrance of I-70 when Danny told Mark to stop at McDonald's. It was time for a round of quarter pounders, and as they ate, they grabbed another case of beer and got back on I-70, heading away from Salina. As Danny handed Charlie another beer, he mentioned something about dropping and breaking his 6-pack of beer back at a gas station in Florida. For Charlie, this brought to mind one time about having to buy a whole bunch of pop. After going into a 7-Eleven drunk one time, Charlie said, "I fell into a stack of them and knocked them over and broke them all." Lisa, still burrowed up against Charlie, suddenly produced a .22 caliber gun from underneath the seat. "Do you know how to fix that?" she asked him. It seemed they had bought it at a flea market, and it wouldn't fire. Charlie said he'd try, and he was successful. And Danny aimlessly fired the pistol out the window at the cars passing in the opposite direction. "It makes him very happy to shoot at people," Charlie said to himself. At I-70, as the car headed up the ramp going west, Charlie said thanks a lot, and that he wanted out. "My mom and dad are expecting me tonight," he explained. As Mark started to slow down, nice guy Danny Remetta changed abruptly, looking over to Mark, saying, "Just keep going. I'm gonna finish this beer and you can just let me out anywhere," said Charlie. "We aren't stopping," Danny said angrily. "We'll let him out later when we stop for gas." Charlie wasn't entirely sure why Danny wanted him to stay, except that perhaps he liked having a drinking buddy. In the next 18 miles or so, Charlie drank 3 more beers, and Danny too, before they stopped to get gas. Danny said, "Wait here," and went inside. Charlie thought of getting out, but just as he started to try to leave the 2-door car, Danny came out with a carton of cigarettes and some sunglasses under his coat. "We can't stop here," he said after they drove away. "They're going to find out I stole all of this." And he stated matter-of-factly, "I should have robbed the place." By now, Charlie was beginning to get frightened of Danny, and Danny could see he was making an impression on Charlie. Danny added, "Back in Arkansas, we picked up a hitchhiker too. I wish we would have killed him, like we did that one down in Florida, who we threw in an alligator pit." "Shut up," said Lisa, but Danny kept drinking and talking louder, and acting real goofy, Charlie thought. "I can't go back to Florida," Danny said, and again Lisa said, "Shut up, Danny." But Danny pulled a .357 Magnum from his pocket and took out 2 bullets. He turned around and looked at Charlie, asking, "Do you think one of these would kill you?" "Sure would," Charlie said quietly. "I shot a girl 5 times out of this gun," Danny said, "but she didn't die." Charlie was getting more scared, and it showed, which Danny relished in, saying, "I don't like killing animals, but it don't bother me none to kill people." This guy's a fruitcake, Charlie thought. He could kill me and not worry about it, just as Danny gave him a reassuring look, saying, "We'll let you out at the Colorado line." But growing worried, Charlie said that it was too far, and he repeated the fact that his family was expecting him. Danny told Mark to keep driving, and Charlie, trying desperately to find a way out, while not coming off too sheepish, said, "Well, y'all get to Colorado and you can take me downtown and buy me a piece of ass." At which time Lisa gave Danny a terrible look, as he looked back at Charlie with a grin. "You can go out and buy a piece of ass too," said Lisa to Danny, "but we ain't gonna have no more rapes." "Hell, I could just go to a bar and spend $30 for a piece of ass," said young Mark behind the wheel. Danny gave Mark a look like, "Shut up and drive," and changed the subject to talk again about something that had happened at a convenience store in Florida. "I could get the electric chair," he said, "and all I got was a lousy $45. "I don't know about you," said Charlie, "but I gotta take a piss." Danny ordered Mark to stop, and Charlie was allowed to get out to urinate alongside the road. As Charlie stood near the car, Danny got out too, and he waved the gun around aimlessly and fired it under the underbrush, 1 bullet coming close to Charlie. Back in the car, Charlie asked for another beer, thinking, if I get drunk, maybe he'll keep drinking them too, and I'll get the hell out of here. And with each beer, Charlie grew numb to the threats, even as Danny bragged about his uncle calling him Charlie Manson. "For my craze to go around killing people like I done," he said. Charlie got cozy next to Lisa, as mile after mile marker flashed by in his now blurred periphery. On and on they went until Danny said to pull off the highway at a Stuckey store in Grainfield, Kansas. He stepped out into the frigid wind of the open plains, went into the store, and while Charlie finally had time to split, he remained in the car, snuggled up next to the warmth of a woman, finding himself rather content, until the blast of gunshots rang out, whiplashing Charlie back to the disturbing reality he had found himself in. And the next thing he knew, Danny was rushing back to the car, and Mark slowly pulled the olds away from the desolate station, as inconspicuously as possible, just like nothing had ever happened, back toward the entrance to I-70. Driving west on I-70 at about Oakley, Kansas, the olds passed another traveler. As the driver looked to his left, a startled Charlie looked to his right. Charlie made wide eyes with the driver as he chugged his can of Old Milwaukee, trying to settle his shaken nerves. Danny also made a cold stare into the driver's eyes, surely sending a chill down the driver's spine. Trying to maintain the speed limit so as to not be noticed, the very noticeable car was then passed by another traveler heading toward Colorado. Charlie watched as the man behind the wheel stared over at Danny, who was using a lighter to burn a military ID card he had stolen from the cash register back at Stuckey's. Sure, Charlie had gotten in the wrong car as a hitchhiker before, having to jump out, but he didn't know what to make of this guy Danny. All he knew was that he was dangerous, a killer. Having by now fully realized Danny had robbed the store, and that the shots he had heard had left the clerk dead, the fat son of a bitch as Danny called him, Charlie was frozen in fear for his own life, at the hands of this sick son of a bitch, he thought. After all, with all the talk of killing, and seeing no one in the car denied any of it, and now this, what in the hell should I do, he asked himself. How do I get out of this shit show? Just as the sheriff's deputy passed by, heading east in the oncoming direction, Mark watched in the rearview mirror as it made a turn and sped up close in behind them, asking Danny, "What do you want me to do?" Danny said, "Don't do anything." Charlie ducked down and then bobbed back up to peer back at the squad car, now on their tail, as the red lights flickered on. Seeing the lights, Mark panicked and excitedly asked again for advice. "Don't stop," said Danny. "I'm not going back to prison." But changed his mind upon seeing a highway exit just ahead. "Pull off here," he yelled at Mark. Mark's face was pale by now, as the squad car followed them onto the ramp, its red lights breaking the grayness of the dark winter day. Coming to a complete stop, the officer stopped 15 feet behind the Olds, and over the loudspeaker he called out to those in the car, "Put your hands on the ceiling." All four did, but as they did, so they began to argue about what they should do next. Lisa tried to pull the gun away from Danny, begging him to stay in the car as he began to open the car door. "Shut the door and put your hands up," the officer shouted into his microphone. But the car door opened further. "I'm going to kill him," said Danny, gun in hand, as Charlie sat frozen in the bucket seat beside Lisa. Danny rushed out of the car and shot at the squad car. The deputy, instead of reaching for his own gun to fire back, crouched down for protection, and with his right arm attempted to pull the car into reverse. But the first round came through the windshield, knocking his hand off the gear shift. Danny fired again with the .357, again through the windshield, this time striking the center of the deputy's chest, the bullet piercing his tie and coat, ribcage and lungs, causing him to slip down into the seat. Charlie looked back through the window of the Olds as Danny stood by the driver's side of the deputy's car. Danny looked through the open car door and pointed the blue steel revolver at the officer, firing 2 more shots. Though missing the deputy, the rounds lodged themselves into the car seat. Blood gushing from the wound in the deputy's chest, he quivered in the seat, expecting more shots. But Danny had failed to reload the gun after the shooting back at Stuckey's, and instead of going back for more bullets, he jumped into the car. Meanwhile, inside the Olds, Mark was in the driver's seat as usual. Lisa had crawled up next to him, as Charlie remained in the back seat, when a strange twist occurred. As Danny got back into the car and Mark lunged the car back onto the road, a shot went off, striking Lisa in her back. She screamed and Danny turned back to see Charlie holding the smoking .22. Danny grabbed the gun from Charlie, hitting him across the nose, screaming, "What are you doing, you crazy son of a bitch?" Charlie looked shocked at what happened, saying, "It accidentally went off." But it had not entirely been an accident. While Danny was out of the car shooting, Charlie had decided to shoot Danny through the back of the front seat once he had returned, grabbing the gun from Mark, making him believe he would use it on the cop if he came near. So as the car was driven away, he aimed at Danny, but Mark Walters' quick turn onto the road caused the gun to shift toward Lisa as it discharged, striking Lisa in the back, seated next to Danny. Bleeding from a wound just above the waist, she wailed in pain, asking to be taken to a hospital. From the off-ramp, the Oldsmobile headed northeast on US 24 toward Levant. Danny realized that even if the deputy had died, he most likely still had time to summon help. So Danny decided to stay off of I-70. "We need another car," Danny said. "This one is red hot. We have to make a switch." On the north edge of Levant, the small farming community 8 miles west of Colby, stood a towering grain elevator. Danny spotted a pickup truck in the driveway, where 2 men were standing by its tailgate. Danny and Mark got out of the Olds and headed for the pickup. Danny pulled out a gun and aimed it at the 2 men, one nearly half the other's age, who had been working at the Bartlett grain elevator that day. Inside the car, Charlie took a shirt out of a suitcase and used it to stop the bleeding from Lisa's wound before helping her out of the car. "Who's inside the building?" Danny asked the 2 captives as he pointed toward the elevator office. "No one," said the older man, as Danny called him a fucking liar. Looking through a corner of the office blinds, he saw 2 more men, one dialing the telephone to call police. Charlie, on the other side of the building, heard a single shot ring out. He's killed another man, Charlie thought, as Danny's bullet lodged just below one of their hearts. Charlie walked back towards the others after he heard the shot, as he figured the police would soon get there, with a sense of relief. So he went to the car to get his bag, and as he paused for a few moments, Danny shouted, "What are you doing? Quit stalling." Mark was in the driver's seat of the pickup, Lisa already in the back seat of the club cab. Into the bed of the truck, Danny hurried the 2 hostages, as fear was spilling in all around. Everyone was pretty sure the law was near, and they were right. Spurred by the shooting of the deputy, an armado of members of the highway patrol, sheriff's offices from multiple counties, and local police were undoubtedly heading their way. Limping along the dirt road, Danny and Charlie were now seated in the bed of the old green pickup truck with the hostages. Danny kept asking the older man where the road was going, but that pissed the old man off and kept talking back to Danny. He shouldn't do that, Charlie thought. Danny will kill him. As Danny put the gun in the old man's ribs and yelled, "Shut up." 4 miles west of Colby, the truck turned north on a road appropriately named 4 Mile Road. "Where does this go?" Danny asked. "Don't mess with me, old man." But again with a belligerent reply. "Screw you," the man said. "You steal my truck and want me to tell you where to go? Hell no." Angry, perhaps frightened, and feeling the pressure of the situation, Danny yelled back at the old man, "Better tell. I can pull the trigger and get both of you." But still, no help came from either of the men. Danny stood up in the bed and banged on the top of the cab, signaling Mark to stop. He jumped out and at gunpoint forced the two men out of the back, onto the gravel road. Charlie jumped over the side and opened the door of the cabin to see how Lisa was doing as Danny held the .357 on the pair. Danny shouted, "I need no hostages and no witnesses," as he looked back at the truck, particularly at Charlie as he approached. Charlie thought to himself, "Now it's my turn. He's pissed off at me for shooting her." Danny raised the gun and pointed it at Charlie, as Charlie frantically waved, attempting to wheel the barrel away from his face, saying, "Wait a minute. Let the girl stay here with me, and you and the kid leave. I'll get her to a doctor," repeating again and again, "If you love her, you'd want her to get to a doctor, Danny." Suddenly for a moment, Danny was very calm, contemplating what the right steps were to take next. He's like a kid trying to decide where he wants ice cream or a candy bar, Charlie thought. Finally, Danny lowered the gun and looked at Lisa. "Do you want to stay here?" he asked. "No," Lisa answered. "I love you." And with that, Danny turned and ordered the two men to start walking away from the truck. Lisa, in pain, laid on her stomach on the front seat, as Charlie on his knees straddled her legs, trying to examine the bullet hole in her back. He glanced out the back window as Danny ordered the two men to lie down, right where the gravel met snow, on the shoulder of the road, where the tailgate blocked Charlie's view. All he could see was Danny standing, looking down, as two shots rang out. Charlie said to Lisa, "Your boyfriend has gone crazy," before Danny returned to the truck. As Danny jumped back into the cab, Lisa rose up in obvious pain and asked Danny if he shot the two men, but Danny said, "No, I just fired warning shots at them." The truck drove away with Mark at the wheel as Charlie looked back at the bodies to see Danny's boot prints only 6 inches or so away from the bullet holes in the back of their heads, making it obvious he had stood right over them as he fired the shots. Going north on 4 Mile Road, they passed an old farmer running into his yard to watch the familiar pickup pass by. Turning onto US Highway 25, they sped into Rawlins County to the north, heading straight for the business district of the town of Atwood. The pickup was now going 95 miles an hour, with Danny in the middle seat beside Charlie, shouting, "We need to get rid of the truck and get another car." As they neared an old stone silo in an old house, Lisa was moaning in the back seat about how much pain she was in. "There's no car," shouted Danny, and they didn't stop. They drove on toward another farmhouse where a Trans Am was in the driveway. "Let's stop here," Mark said. "Oh no," Charlie said to himself. "We will get in the house and Danny will kill everyone like they do in the movies." But at 95 miles per hour, Walter's eyes were bigger than his ability to stop in time, so they carried on. As they came over a hill, they saw a flashing blue light ahead in the distance, and as Danny pointed it out to Mark, Charlie, wanting to trick him to get to what must be a roadblock ahead as quickly as he could, explained that it's just a road grader, saying, "In Kansas, the cops don't have blue lights." But Danny made Mark turn around as he yelled, "U-turn now," and the pickup headed directly back to where it had came from. "We will shoot it out until we die," Danny said, as the police car with the flashing light was only 100 yards behind them by now. As shots began to be fired from the squad car toward the pickup, Charlie shouted at Danny, "Why the fuck didn't you let me out when I wanted out?" Danny turned and looked at Charlie in the eye, and at 95 miles per hour with bullets flying, he reached across and opened the door of the truck and said to Charlie, "It's okay if you want to get out, go ahead." Afraid of both falling out and of Danny, Charlie grabbed the door handle and slammed the door shut. Meanwhile, officers seemed to be closing in from everywhere. The Colby police, county officers, and the highway patrol descending on the pickup from every possible road. Everyone in the truck was frightened, but Danny, he was preparing for a shootout, holding the Magnum in one hand and pulling the .22 from his jacket pocket and handing that one to 18-year-old Mark Walter. "Here, use this," he said, as he pointed up the asphalt road. "There's another farmhouse up there. Get Lisa into the house." Slowing down, but still at a higher rate of speed, Mark careened the pickup crazily onto a driveway, bouncing over a ditch. As the truck neared its final resting place, Charlie figured he'd better be able to defend himself against Danny, yelled at Mark, "Give me the gun," and the 18-year-old complied. Coming to a rest between two farmhouses, Danny leapt over Charlie to be the first to exit through the passenger door, as police cars filled the yard. And just as quickly, Danny began to fire at anything that moved, his shot shattering the windshield of a trooper's car, along with the flashing light on top. The next minute or so was a sea of bullets, the remaining occupants of the truck caught in a violent crossfire. Next to leave the cab, an unarmed Mark spilled out of the passenger door, crouching next to the truck, when with a rifle's blast, a bullet pierced his head and another to the hip, and he fell dead on the spot. Lisa now climbed out of the back seat and fell out of the door to the ground, crossing under the truck, where she looked up at the man, who she thinks is wearing a green army uniform, who fired repeatedly at her. She screamed at him not to kill her, but he kept shooting, and as a bullet grazed her arm, she screamed even louder, and louder as she fell near the pieces of Mark's brains, in a pool of blood oozing from his body just a few feet away. Danny, willing to fight until death, fired off his last bullet before being shot in the ass. Charlie, last to leave the truck, ran with the 22 West through a row of trees and ended up behind a storage building. As he turned the corner, he tossed the gun, which buried itself in the snow, and he himself dropped to the ground in a snowbank. He heard Lisa screaming right behind him as he tried to surrender to a sheriff's deputy, gun drawn and aimed at the back of his head. Sprawled out, Charlie shouted, "Don't shoot me, please, I'm just a hitchhiker." As Charlie was led away in handcuffs, he saw Lisa bleeding but alive. And lying motionless on the ground was Danny and Mark. Both of them are dead, he figured. Lisa was lifted to her feet, and as she was being taken away, Danny, still lying on the ground, looked up at her. "I love you, Danny," she said. "I love you. I love you too, Lisa," he replied. "Don't worry, everything is gonna be okay." James Charlie Hunter would go on to tell Tom Leathers from the Kansas City town squire, "We were in the back seat the entire time, just sitting there." Charlie would reiterate again and again of him and Lisa. "We were hostages, at least I for damn sure was." There was little doubt the person responsible for destroying so many lives was Daniel Rometta, and seeing Mark Walter was unquestionably dead, two questions remained. 1. Had Charlie, a man who had never been in the penitentiary, never been convicted of a violent crime, and never been a threat to society, simply been a man who got in the wrong car at the wrong time? Or was Charlie Hunter a man who indeed had a criminal record while in the military, a charge of assault and battery, and a charge of maiming, nothing short of a ticking time bomb that just happened to go off in Thomas County? And 2. With this intentional, unprovoked, inexcusable, and unjustifiable act of carnage, had Lisa been under the influence of people her parents didn't approve of, given her age, an honor roll student from a middle-class background? Had the girl that actually dropped out of school and had been kicked out of her home by her own parents and stolen a gun from her father been a person who actively engaged in crime and was just as guilty as the one who had pulled the trigger himself? Would the perception of innocence until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt apply in this case? Or would public opinion in Thomas County turn out to be too much for Charlie and Lisa? Seeing the whole spree had been watched by everyone on television throughout the county and elsewhere. How much of the public's mood would affect that perception? In addition to having to live with the fact that the whole terrifying tale from grainfield to the farmyard, which occurred in only a short span of time, would Charlie and Lisa spend the rest of their lives paying for those 138 minutes? I'm Cory Zimmerman, and this is Spoon River Gothic, Season 2. Death Rides the Highway, a thrill ride fueled by murder and terror. Think, feel, and understand the world around you with Spoon River Gothic Podcast, because we go where the others don't. We dive deeper. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. It means more than you know in this cutthroat world. And until next time, keep a vigilant eye over your shoulder, because there's always more to the story.
Ever wonder how much of your personal data is out there on the internet for anyone to see? More than you think. Your name, contact info, social security number, home address, and even information about your family members is all being compiled by data brokers and sold to the highest bidders online. That means anyone on the web, criminal or investigator, can get your private details, which, as true crime enthusiasts know all too well, increases your risk of identity theft, phishing scams, harassment, stalking, and unwanted phone calls. As a podcast that exists publicly and shares our opinions online, we are hyper aware of safety and security, and all this data being so easily searchable on the internet can have real-life consequences. This is why Spoon River Gothic is proud to partner with Delete Me, the #1 service in online data removal. Delete Me finds and removes any information you don't want online and makes sure it stays off. Their dedicated team finds and removes your personal info from the largest people search databases and helps prevent potential ID theft, doxing, stalking, and phishing scams in the process. That's why I personally recommend Delete Me for protecting yourself and your personal information. Sign up at joindeleteme.com/spoonriver and provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts will take it from there. As part of their subscription service, you will even receive personalized privacy reports showing what they found, where they found it, and what they removed. Delete Me isn't just a one-time service. Their experts are always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want accessible online. To put it simply, Delete Me does all the hard work of wiping you and your family's personal info off the web and making your personal profile no longer anyone's to sell. So join us at deleteme.com/spoonriver because no one wants to be a victim nor a suspect. So get protected, and the next time a case hits too close to home, you won't find yourself asking the stranger on the other end of the phone, "How did you get my number?" Go to joindeleteme.com/spoonriver and get started today.
Death rides the highway.